Be here. So just quickly, I'm a humanitarian aid worker with Mercy Corps. It's an international aid organization. I've been with them for about 11 years. So I do emergency response, disasters, and conflict typically. So I've seen a lot of disasters and conflicts, pretty much everyone that's happened in the last decade. And this is, as you said, Syria is an incredibly complex and massive humanitarian crisis. Mercy Corps has been responsible. So what I want to do is, it's my job to be pretty much out on the front lines, so I spend a lot of time, talking with refugees and Syrians as they come out, hearing their stories. So I wanted to share a little of that with you, as well as sort of what the ground realities are in terms of the host communities that are taking care of the refugees and how they're coping and the strains it's putting on them and affecting the entire regional balance in the area, as well as a little bit of what's going on inside Syria as well, and what we're trying to do and what others can hopefully kind of try and do as well, to at least focus on, my focus is on the innocent civilians that have been sort of pretty much caught in the middle of all this, no matter where they stand, what their beliefs are, the toll it's taking on, on the civilians, which has been tremendous. In Syria right now, there's over 6 million people suffering, displaced from their homes, usually multiple times. We don't have enough food to eat, adequate shelter. Over 2 million people have actually fled Syria into neighboring countries. And so in terms of the scope of this crisis that we're looking at, if you look at the number of people in Syria that have been impacted, it would be the equivalent to if 100 million Americans lost their homes or had to flee their homes. So, per capita, it's a massive impact on this on the people. This is a quick map to orient if people haven't been paying attention. It's from the UN. So basically, it just kind of outlays kind of the humanitarian issues that are going on in the refugee populations. So the country that's hosting the largest number of refugees is Lebanon. It has over 240,000 refugees. In Jordan, there are over 500,000 refugees. Turkey has the third highest, it's about 460,000 refugees, and Iraq has over 180,000 refugees. So, and then they're also in Egypt and many other countries, but these are the ones that are hosting the largest populations. In terms of where Mercy Corps is working, and so the exposure I've had to the conflict and the humanitarian issues around it, I've been primarily focusing my work in Lebanon and Jordan for about the last year and a half. So when I just came back from Jordan last week, so a lot of the things I'll talk about are very recent. So I thought, first of all, I'd just take you on a very, very short trip of what it's like to be a Syrian refugee, which is not a pleasant experience at all. I was at the border just last week. The border is the Jordanian border with Syria, and as a humanitarian that goes in to receive incoming refugees, we typically get a phone call from the Jordanian military who patrols the border, and they will call and say, okay, they've spotted people coming across the desert. You end up going out usually to the border around 2, 3 a.m., and that's because people have to come across at night because there are snipers out there shooting at them as families and children try and flee for their safety. The Jordanian military sometimes does a nice courtesy air cover so the kids can literally run in under fire that's going out from the regime troops that are down there. So they come across absolutely traumatized. I mean, if they haven't already experienced, traumas in their country that are beyond anything I think most of us can imagine. I mean, we're talking about kids that are tortured. They're often tortured to pressure their parents into doing something, whether it be admitting they did something wrong, even if they didn't, or giving up a neighbor, giving a name away. So kids have been really used as pawns in this conflict and have been terribly traumatized. There's sexual violence, particularly against girls in their early teens. So we're seeing families come in that are just, have been through terrible, terrible atrocities, and then just that last leg of their journey in has been, something that's, they're hoping they can make it. We see a lot of kids come in alone, or as a group of kids, and this is because their parents can't afford to get them out. They may have some obligations at home. It could be maybe a grandparent that's sick and they have to stay and make sure they're taken care of because they can't make the journey. But also it does cost money to get out as a refugee. And it typically costs about $100 a person to get that sort of last leg of transportation into Jordan. So they call them smugglers. I think it's a bad translation, but it's essentially the people that get them out in the middle of the night. They pay them because it's obviously, well, the drivers are risking their lives, and also there's a lot of expenses involved in it. But so families are actually saving up their money, they're borrowing, they're selling everything they have in country. I mean, I've talked to kids that say, my parents sold, all of our goats, they're farmers, and so they had enough money for me and my brothers to get out, so we left, but now they're trying to find enough money so they can get out. And so the kids will go ahead just for the, the parents are obviously trying to save their children. When they come across, this is a bit what it looks like at the transit center in Jordan. They come in and they have to put all their stuff down for security because they're going to go onward to a refugee camp from here. This is in Jordan where they have refugee camps. In Lebanon they don't have camps, so I'll get to that in a minute. But so they get processed and they go into a camp. And this was just a scene that kind of broke my heart. There was a gentleman that came across. Most people are coming with a grain bag. They're made of just like white plastic. It's something that they have very cheaply available, and they put whatever they can carry into it. So typically it's just some old clothes. But this one gentleman came across with his family. He's got 3 kids, and the guards were going through it, and they pulled out this trowel. A trowel you use to lay bricks. And they took it away from him because it was sharp and it's 3 in the morning, and I don't think I really thought too much about it. It looked dangerous, and no, you can't take that, just like they do to you at the airport. And I just saw this man's face fall. And he didn't say a word, he didn't protest, he just wanted to get into Jordan and be safe. But I later talked to him and I said, sir, out of everything that you could have in your household, you chose to bring a trowel with you? I mean, it just seemed very odd. I mean, think if you had to leave your house and you could bring one object, would you bring an old rusty trowel? And he said to me, that's my profession. I'm a mason, and my biggest hope is that I can find a job to provide for my family when I get to Jordan. So, and obviously, that was the most important thing to him, was to be able to provide for his family. So, families coming across that are just really trying to seek safety and a safe haven for their families. So this is inside a transit center, so when they get there, this is what it's like. You've got whatever you could carry out, and you're queued up and you're waiting to be processed. You go through a process where they get all your ID, and they give you a little ID card that then says you're an official refugee in Jordan. But you'll see it's generally packed with children. Over 50% of the refugees are children. Over 75% are women and children. So it's tragic. This little girl, Zeneb, told me that she had been trying with her family for over a year to get out. And literally, it took them 10 days to get out. They were coming from homes in the north, and they had to come down, and they were staying with relatives in various villages, and eventually were able to cross out in Jordan. So this is in Jordan, and in Jordan there are 5 refugee camps right now. This is the largest. It's called Zachary Refugee Camp. It's about 10 miles south of the Jordanian border, and they actually started this camp in August of last year. There are over 100,000 people living there now, and if it was a city, it would be the 4th largest city in Jordan. So, the refugee population has really, it's become a huge issue in Jordan. They've been receiving them generously. In the very beginning, I mean, they were rolling out the red carpet, in terms of hospitality, understanding all the issues that these people had faced and wanting to help them. I think the heart is still there. They still understand the suffering that the Syrians have gone through. But now they're starting to also get concerned about their own economy. You know, this is a lot of people coming in that are using up their very limited resources, that are competing with them for jobs in some cases. So the red carpet is not quite so red anymore. They still are allowed in, they have camps for them, but they are now really given a lot less freedom of movement. They used to be able to live in communities, but now they go straight into a camp where they really need to stay until they get some kind of permission to move out of it. And the camp life is not an easy life. It's certainly better than getting shot at in Syria, I think, but it is a very hot and dusty, harsh place in the summers, and in the winter it is a very cold place and very difficult. This is the inside of a refugee tent. Let's see, you could probably put 3 or 4 of those tents in this room, and inside each tent you have a family of about 7 people living. So there's a communal toilet, about a 5-minute walk down that you share with maybe 100 other people. So really difficult conditions, and people have been living like this for well over a year now, so in some cases much longer. The interesting thing is that 70% of the refugees don't live in the camps, and this is 70% when I'm talking about Lebanon and Jordan. So 70% of them are actually living in the communities. So I'll refer to those as host communities when I'm talking, just so you know, but these are communities where they live, they usually are renting. Sometimes they're living with relatives, they have extended family that live in either Lebanon or Jordan, so they go and live with relatives. But in most cases, they're actually renting something. And this family is living in a garage, which they're paying approximately $200 a month to live in. They don't have any running water, they have to kind of go outside there's some things in the back, but it's obviously not a home, it's a garage. There's people that live in chicken coops. There's people who live in abandoned shacks, farm sheds, attics of houses, warehouses, storage containers, you name it. If they can find a place for shelter, they are going there, because the situation in terms of housing in both Lebanon and Jordan is rents have skyrocketed because you've got 2 million refugees that suddenly have moved into these communities that are competing for housing. And there's just the supply is very low now. So they really are taking whatever they can get. And in Lebanon, the country has not started any official camps. There's muttering going on as we speak that they might start doing it, but they actually are quite against the idea of having camps because they never wanted them to stay too long. Lebanon also hosts a very large Palestinian refugee community and others. And those have been there for decades, and actually, you go to a refugee camp for Palestinians, and people have been there for generations, and so they are very concerned about taking on more, more refugees into their community because they've got a pretty unstable government and not a very great economy themselves. So refugees, when they come across, they have a lot of basic needs. And that's one thing Mercy Corps really focuses on, is helping out in that kind of those new arrivals. When people come across, is what do they need? Because they literally come across with that bag that we saw them with pictures with, a few items in it. So they need basic items desperately. Mercy Corps gives them blankets, mattresses, floor mats if they're living in tents or in rented accommodations, hygiene kits, and a variety of other kinds of things just to help them get started. So they have some basic items to subsist with. Also, we have a winterization project, which we did last year and we're kicking off this year. As I mentioned before, winters are harsh. I think people think of the desert and they think it's going to be warm year-round. It's not. It gets freezing cold in the winter. In the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, it snows pretty much every year. And in Jordan, it also snows, and the temperatures can drop below freezing. So we have a program where we give out heaters and gas cylinders. And what we do on this, as well as all the other stuff, is because there's a fair amount of tensions, as I talked about, between the host communities and the refugees in terms of competition for jobs, competition for housing. We've actually tried to look at kind of how we can program to help alleviate tensions. And this is something I think is really important looking forward for the whole region is that as the refugee population grows, and is estimated to grow to 3.5 million by the end of this year, so another 1.5 million in the next couple months. That as it grows, the tensions become, they can get worse and worse between the host communities, which can result in borders being closed and them actually not being able to get out and to actually flee the bombing, which is something that, from a humanitarian standpoint, is actually against the Geneva Convention, and something that we're very concerned about, those border closures. But one thing we're really trying to do, and trying to also encourage our colleague agencies to do, is to program in a way that benefits both the host community and the refugee. So if you just give everything to the incoming refugees, and you're in a very poor community already, and a Lebanese fellow, it's a local there, who's lived there his whole life, who's got his family and his children, and he's lost his job because Syrians came in, and they work for a lot less money because they're really desperate for a job. And so they're willing to do anything to put food in their families' mouths. So they'll so the Lebanese guy might lose his job, seeing a Syrian take it. And then you see the Syrian family also get the food packages and the blankets, and that causes a lot of problems in a community. And that can really lead to, to violence against the refugees, a lot of tensions in the refugee community, and again, it is a very bad situation overall. So what we try and do is we try and do everything in a way that benefits both sides. So with any kind of distribution, we give out vouchers whenever possible. So it's like a series of vouchers that are like, kids or whatever it is. Then they can go to Lebanese-owned businesses and purchase items. So the Lebanese community actually gets a bit of an advantage out of it. They've got all these new shoppers with that. So it's actually propping up their economy, helping their economy rather than bringing it down. So like if Mercy Corps decided instead to go and buy all this stuff, in another country, put it on a boat, first of all, that's wasteful and stupid because it's expensive, but it's also going to destroy their market. So we like to buy everything locally when we can and support local markets. And again, in a way to kind of bring the communities together so they see the advantage of it. So we also do home renovations. This is actually one of the garages that someone lived in. And again, I said there was no water, there's nothing. So we do things like go in and put in water systems and just try and present a decent place to live for a family. And this, as I said, winter gets bad. This is last winter in Zachary. So it's a really rough life if you live in a tent and it's basically flooded out and the wind's howling and the tent's falling down, and you've got 7 kids and rain, and it's just an incredibly difficult environment. And so right now, one of the big things from the humanitarian side is ensuring that funding is made available through governments, through donors, through everyone, for providing for the refugee communities during the winter, as well as working inside Syria to get materials to them, because they are in just as bad, if not worse, condition in many communities. Water is another big thing. Jordan's the 4th driest country in the world, so they always have a problem getting water for their own residents, and then they have 500,000 new people show up that also need a lot of water. So we've been working to, again, really try to ensure that water is made available. And it's a very big issue working in the refugee camps because it's a health issue. It's not just like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have great water? If you don't have clean water and proper sanitation facilities in a refugee camp, you have waterborne diseases like cholera that kill. And so that has been a real primary focus for Mercy Corps, and we're providing water to about 500,000 people in northern Jordan, so refugees and, again, the host communities that they're living in. So, and these are just, we built 2 water plants in the camps and 2 borehole wells just to ensure that they weren't taking water from existing water supplies. They were already servicing the the Jordanian community. We wanted to make sure that it didn't impact the locals' water supply. And then in the schools, school is a huge issue in that most Syrian refugee kids have not been going to school. Inside Syria, most schools have been bombed, or they're closed, or they've become shelters for displaced people to live in. So school, just has not been happening regularly at all. And then they get out into the refugee communities. In Lebanon, the curriculum is totally different. They teach in French and English most of the time, whereas in Syria, they're taught in Arabic. So if a kid does go into the Lebanese classroom, it's like me showing up in Kenya and showing up in a classroom. It's not going to work, right? So they haven't really had any opportunities there. And in Iraq, the same issue. They're Arabic speaking in Syria, and they come across into the Kurdish areas, and they're speaking a Kurdish dialect, as well as the syllabus is completely different. So finally this year, there's some funding has become available in Jordan, and school is kicking off in a more serious way. There are schools in the refugee camps, as well as schools in the communities. And Work Square's just been working to make sure that now they've got 2 shifts going in Jordan is the way they're handling it. Morning shift is for Jordanian kids, afternoon shift is for Syrian kids. And it works out well because it's one school. The chairs are all there, the desks are all there. But again, water was an issue because they only had water for 100 kids, and now they've got 200 kids. So everything doubled. So, and if you see, this is a picture of the Syrian classroom. You'll see 2 kids in almost every desk. There are so many kids who want to get back into school. Again, hygiene, these are just washing stations that we do in Lebanon and in the refugee camps. And then youth. I've talked a lot about them, but just I think you can't talk enough about how this is impacting the children in Syria. It's getting called a lost generation because, again, they haven't had access to school. They have gone through terribly traumatic events in their countries, and they come across, with just horrible, trauma symptoms, and they are living in a very isolated environment in a lot of cases because in Lebanon and in other places they don't necessarily feel as welcome. And so they don't go out and mix. It's not they're not from there. They often came, even though they might be very educated, middle class or even upper middle class people, they have lost everything. And I've heard more stories about how they're embarrassed to go out because they don't even have shoes on their feet. And they feel just so much shame. And so we're working a lot with kids to help them through their traumas. We've done a lot of counseling sessions where kids draw and do things to express their fears and what they've been through. This boy is very typical. His name's Abraham. But as you'll see, part of this exercise is to take them through and express what happened to them. Because if you don't, I'm not a psychologist, but from child psychologists, the belief is that if a child experiences something traumatic, then they really do need to verbalize it, even if it's just with one trusted person, but they need to talk about it. And so this is a way to get kids starting to kind of talk and express themselves. And this page is about, draw your house. What was your house like in Syria? And you see kids doing this all the time. When you say draw your house, it's typically a bomb falling on the house. The other thing you see all the time is it says there's an exercise saying, can you draw your family? And you'll see them draw certain, like 4 or 5 people all in full color. And then there'll be 1 or maybe 2 people that are just in outline. And you'll ask, well, why haven't you colored those ones in yet? And they're dead. Or they've gone missing, and they've never seen them again. So this is a lot of the traumas that these kids have, and we're just trying to get them to express them so they can heal and move on. And then there's obviously a lot of games, try and lighten it up. We don't. And we also have a lot of things to get kids out in the community. Again, I talked about how isolated a lot of the refugees are as they come across because they don't have connections into the community. So we have a lot of activities with teenagers or young, this boy's 11, Fadi, but kind of that like 10 to 18-year-old range where we do all sorts of activities like we have filmmaking class with them. We have a photography, photojournalism class. But the idea is they all get to pick a theme that takes them out into the community. So he was doing his on work, and so he had to go all around this town, Baalbek, and meet the proprietor, which is generally a Lebanese gentleman, and oftentimes So this boy is Sunni, and about 90% of the refugees are Sunni. Baalbek happens to be controlled. I mean, it's a democratically elected Hezbollah political party as in charge in Baalbek. So it's a very interesting dynamic that you have the Sunni refugees kind of going into an area that might be problematic. And to your point, to be quite honest, it hasn't been. It surprised me. I thought it would be, because actually Hezbollah is actually going in to fight with Assad. So it's complicated in there. But part of this whole program is to integrate the society, and so they can actually understand that these are people, that this is just a kid, and his mother's just a mother, and to get away from any kind of fears or concerns about some of those issues that might cause those tensions. And so he's gone around and he knows pretty much every shopkeeper, I swear in Baalbek, this kid does. He's going to be the mayor in 2 weeks. But it really is amazing. I mean, to your point, there are sectarian issues that are brewing, but I think they've been politically ginned up. I don't think it's the reality of the people. And we're seeing that when you bring them together on a human-to-human level, just as people, those problems don't exist. And this is in Jordan. We do a lot of play things, and since it's the middle of the desert, we thought sandcastle competitions might be a good thing to do. But we also do play spaces and playgrounds. And again, this is just the idea of getting kids into some kind of normal environment. Because you saw the picture of the tent, and that's where they're stuck most of the time if they don't have play spaces or recreational activities. And we've done sports courts, after-school activities. We did find that as much as kids want to go back to school, after not sitting in a classroom for 2 years, they're not very disciplined, and they don't like to sit for 8 hours and get lectured to anymore. Imagine, after your summer break, it's always kind of hard to kind of sit down and start studying. So we do a lot of activities with them that mesh with the curriculum, arts programs, music programs, to try and spice it up a little bit and get them really engaged in learning again. And then just looking forward, the one thing I would say that, one thing that we really are advocating on, and when I say advocating, we work on advocacy messages to the US government and to the European governments as well. And we talk a lot about what the United States and other governments should be doing to better service the humanitarian needs of this crisis. And one thing that we are facing a real challenge with is that so much of the work we do is emergency related, blankets, heaters for the winter, fixing someone's shelter. But this has been a crisis going on for 2.5 years, and sadly, it doesn't look like it's going to end soon, and that all the refugees are just going to go back home and things will be back to normal. This is going to go on for some time. So we're really advocating with the governments that they need to start making funding available for the refugee communities to have something besides just an emergency response. So we're looking at livelihoods and what can we do to build livelihoods of the refugees while they're refugees, so they can start to earn money. They're all willing and able and eager to work. There just aren't the jobs there for them, or sometimes there aren't permissions. The government of the host communities doesn't let them. So we're working on that. Another thing that we're working on very strongly right now, and we're starting to see at least a little movement. I don't want to get hopeful, but if you've been following the news closely, is access to deliver aid inside Syria. So, I'm not going to quote the Geneva Convention, but basically, humanitarian aid workers, medical personnel should have access to assist civilian populations, and this is something that's in the conventions, and there has not been any access. In terms of, any safe access. Sure, you can sneak in there and risk your life, but there's absolutely no safe access. And the other thing is that, civilians should not be targeted, and nor should the places that civilians are known to be, things like schools, universities, and hospitals, should never be targeted. So these are standard Geneva Conventions which are not being followed at all, and we're strongly advocating now, particularly kind of on the heels of the chemical weapons inspectors going in. There's been a lot of conversation going on that, we can't guarantee safe access for aid workers because it's just impossible, it's a war. Well, first of all, I've worked in a lot of wars and we've managed it in others, so I don't buy that excuse. But the other thing is that now that actually the inspectors are in and they actually are getting access, then why can't humanitarian workers go in to deliver food to these people, to deliver blankets to them? So, you know, we're really making a push now, given that at least the inspectors are inside and having some access. So those are a couple issues that we are strongly pushing on.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, so it looks like we have a